Hey everyone, welcome back to Innovation Unplugged, where we break down the real stories behind the technologies transforming enterprise infrastructure. I'm Jim Brismitsis, your host, and today I'm joined by Stephen Leotis, a dear friend of ours from Moso Networks. Moso and Chasm have a very strong relationship, one that we've bundled as our own private 5G solution called Keen, and we'll dig into a little bit of what that is today. Now, Moso is tackling a critical challenge in the private enterprise wireless space by making cellular deployments as simple, scalable, and as accessible as Wi-Fi. And as enterprises look to adopt private 5G and CBRS networks, the complexity of these deployments, the management, and the integration has become a major bottleneck, something that we all know too true here as we have built and operated our own key networks. Moso is changing that with their cloud-managed approach that brings cellular into the modern enterprise stack. We're big fans of theirs, as I mentioned. It's an integral part of our Keen private 5G solution, and one that we have actually deployed in market in several accounts, some of which we'll even talk about today. And so with that, if you're thinking about the future of connectivity where private networks, maybe edge computing and AI converge, this is the conversation with you. Stephen, welcome to our show today.
Jim, it's great to be here. Yeah, I feel like we were together just recently, but I guess it was last week in Las Vegas.
And 2 weeks before that, Barcelona and MWC. So yeah, we've got a lot of good FaceTime recently. Well, let's start with the journey. Moso is a relatively, I wouldn't say new brand, but it's relatively new in the world of kind of the private 5G space. And so maybe people don't know enough about the background and the proven technology behind the great products that you all have at Moso Networks. So maybe I'll just have you share with us the origin story.
Yeah, it's great. I love to share this story. There's kind of a lot of nuance and excitement over the past 6 or so years as we've really evolved with private 5G. I've personally been involved in CBRS and kind of the enterprise 5G adoption since around 2019, and since then it's changed dramatically. So from a Moso perspective, we've been an independent U.S. based organization building private 5G solutions for about the past 3.5 years. But prior to that, we have over 15 years of experience building carrier grade small cells and the software pieces that hold that together and allow that to be easily managed and provisioned. So we're actually a wholly owned subsidiary of a large experienced telecom equipment manufacturer called Circom out of Taiwan. And what that does is it gives us a lot of deep understanding and experience working with the largest carriers in the world and taking that technology from the telco side and bringing it to the enterprise. And so that's what Moso has been doing. We have the product depth, engineering depth, and then, really tailoring that to what the enterprise needs today. So one story I do like to tell, which is, the Moso name. Have I shared this with you? Kind of the history.
No, I'm actually hearing this for the first time. I didn't know there was a story behind it, so I'm eager to learn more about it.
Yeah, so it was during the inception of the business. I think one of the most fun parts about kind of starting a new entity is coming up with the name. And so I really wanted it to be something organic. There's just something missing in the market from that particular space, and in organic life, there's a lot of these really huge interconnected kind of entities, and so kind of played around with a bunch of them, but found Moso just by happenstance searching around. And if you don't know what Moso is actually a type of bamboo. It's the fastest growing plant on Earth. But what's really interesting, what kind of ties it really together, is when you see these big bamboo forests, they're actually all interconnected underneath. Mm-hmm. So it's really this idea and representation of what we see private 5G being, this big interconnected network. And of course, we want the adoption to grow as fast as bamboo, which you can almost watch it grow, this particular type. So.
Well, I was actually thinking about putting bamboo in my backyard. So how convenient that this story comes up.
Maybe be careful. I think it can take over.
Yeah, that is the worry. So this is a conversation you and I have had over Sangria in Barcelona, and just recently on a panel conversation that you moderated last week at IWCE. A couple of things I want to really kind of get your opinions on. The first is that private cellular historically has been difficult for the enterprise. I'd love to get your perspective as to why. And then we often throw around CBRS. And for those who are unaware of what CBRS is, maybe we can get a quick download from you on what that spectrum is and how it's used.
Sure. Yeah, it's a big topic that I think about a lot as far as, how do we get to the mass scale adoption of private 5G? And when we need to define what enterprise is as well, because as you know, we see different industries adopting the technology at different rates. And I think the excitement when you kind of look at the inception of defining, what was the target addressable market? This is probably back 2017, 2018 timeframe. The massive scale was really in the small, medium-sized enterprise. And so, this could be anything from school campuses to logistics centers to, any kind of standard kind of enterprise business building. So I think we're at the adoption in some industries where there's awareness, there is the capability in the SI space. As we move down market, it gets a lot more complex. So from an adoption perspective, I think we're still working on education and awareness that the technology exists and how the technology can be adopted. So, that second piece on adoption is really where I think is a critical barrier that Moso is trying to fix, which is the complexity piece. So you've seen the Nokias and the Ericssons out there being adopted with their solutions, which is fantastic. They have really feature-rich, macro scaled-down technology, but we've found from some customers that it can be complex and tying it into the system can be very expensive. And so we're trying to solve that complexity piece, making it simple, making it more Wi-Fi access point-like from an IT or OT manager experience. So, this means, removing all of that cellular complexity. And in the case of the work we're doing together, making it basically plug and play from their perspective.
You bet.
And the last piece there, which I'm glad you brought up CBRS, because licensed spectrum has been kind of a hindrance for the adoption of cellular and enterprise until CBRS, back in 2020 when it was finally approved by the FCC. So that access to this CBRS spectrum is really unique here in the US, where it makes it very affordable, very minimal cost to use this spectrum. And that's really opened up access to this technology across all enterprises.
Yeah, just to take another layer of depth on what CBRS is, generally, and keep me honest on this, Stephen, but generally, there is spectrum allocated and governed by government agencies. Here in the United States, it's the FCC. And they will license that out to bidders. In the case of the MNOs, such as AT&T or Verizon, they'll go and bid for blocks of spectrum that they pay, frankly, a premium for, billions of dollars in aggregate. CBRS is a carve-out of what's called mid-band spectrum that has good propagation range, but also is a fairly limited band of frequency that is now made available across the United States. And you could certainly stand up and run a CBRS-based network using a GAA or a generally available license, or in some cases there have been bidders that have bought what's called a priority access license. But nonetheless, what it is available spectrum for any enterprise that could use that for running their own private network, a network that they own, they manage, and that has no dependencies on any carriers or the like. They could simply, from the spectrum perspective, right down to the equipment themselves, go and manage that. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's been the big innovation. You don't need to have billions of dollars to now have access to spectrum. So
right.
CBRS has really opened that up. And the great thing is the changes recently with improvement in these protected areas and the longevity of these heartbeats or loss of connection to the SAS has really enabled adoption by the biggest ports like we're going to talk about here, and also utility companies that really need zero downtime, and they're trusting CBRS for that.
Right. So you touched on this earlier. I want to spend just a moment further on it, which is the network incumbents. We don't need to name names, but if you're in this space, it's pretty easy to find out who they are. And you touched on something that I think is pretty critical. Yes, these network incumbents have built macro scale networks. These are networks that run across entire nations, entire geographies. They run on licensed spectrum, and therefore they're able to broadcast at higher power and reach further distances. But they're designed for carrier-grade networks. And one area that I've been spending time educating enterprises in as we engage in keen-level conversations is the same standards of technology that goes into those big cellular macro networks are the same standards that you'll find in Moso products and other products, because they're all 3GPP compliant, 3GPP being a big standards body here, not here in the United States, but globally. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is those networks incumbents have had some success in larger environments, but you touched on something that I think they're all struggling in, which is how do you take macro scale complexity and make it work from a standpoint of I would say, the broad set of enterprise and maybe even upper mid-market segments of clients as well. And I think there they struggle. They certainly struggle on complexity. I think they also very much struggle on pricing too. And from our standpoint, and what one of our key design points with Keen was that we needed Keen to plug into the enterprise way of how they do networking and run their IT, not the other way around. Are you seeing similar perspectives in the enterprise engagements that you've been involved in?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the key things that's unique to each enterprise. They all have their IT systems, how they're set up, and their security protocols and everything. And so it's up to us to bring this new network fabric, this 5G layer, and plug it into those existing systems. And that's going to be unique. It's going to be more consultative. But at the end of the day, as we're talking to these different enterprises, as long as we're solving a real problem for them, solving a real business case, I think that's the first hurdle, right? Yeah. Once we say, hey, I can save you X amount of dollars, I can drive these efficiencies, or in the best case, I can drive the ability for you to make some additional revenue. Right. And then, having the solution that matches the ROI definition, which I think we have a really unique position there with the economics we're able to drive. And then, the Keen solution in particular, you guys have really done a lot of work to make that plugging into the IT system very straightforward and seamless, and make that effort a lot less. So that's absolutely a necessity we're seeing across everyone from Fortune 50 companies down to even smaller organizations.
Right. In all of those organizations, I've come across a conversation that I think you've heard probably more so than I have, which is, but why not Wi-Fi? And what would be your answer to that?
Well, it's definitely one of those that I think we've been seeing a little bit less of that recently because education awareness has gotten better. But Wi-Fi is great at a lot of things. And I was in Wi-Fi starting maybe 15 years ago and seeing the evolution of that. So deep understanding of how that technology works. And we're not going to go and compete with Wi-Fi on how many bits can I put through it? What's the throughput? The capacity of Wi-Fi now with all the expanded spectrum availability, that's not the problem we're trying to solve. With cellular, I definitely see it as an and solution for indoor, and outdoor we're solving problems that Wi-Fi just can't. The benefits we have for cellular, number one is going to be the coverage that you get. Mm-hmm. The propagation characteristics are just the higher power allowed by FCC. We can cover huge areas outside, which you can't do with Wi-Fi. So we see as much as 10x less number of access points needed. So with one radio, I don't have to deploy 10 Wi-Fi APs. So that reduces the number of cables that I need to run or fiber runs that I need, which are exorbitantly expensive for these outdoor deployments. So we're seeing it still as an and we're solving problems where we need reliability, we need mobility, and for these systems, and again, additionally, the security that's added with cellular.
100%. Yeah. Well, speaking of deployments, we've had several that we've been engaging in, one of which we highlighted at Mobile World Congress, which happened in earlier this month in Barcelona, and that was in Port of Tacoma. And for those of you that are not aware, we have deployed, I think, Stephen, keep me honest on this, I think we've deployed the first of your latest generation 5G OD2 outdoor radios at the Port of Tacoma here in the United States. And that eventually will become a 2,400 acre coverage campus that we're helping them with use cases around security cameras and some other use cases. I'd love to get your perspective on some other deployments that Moso's been involved in. Feel free to name names or not, but really it's really the use cases that have driven those deployments that I'm quite interested in learning from you on.
Yeah, we're really excited about Port of Tacoma, and I think that particular radio and the simplicity that the integration with Keen, you guys go in deploying it so quickly, I think that speaks volumes to how far we've come with the simplicity and this blueprint idea we can take other places. So one thing that we're doing here at Moso is we build the things that we're really great at, which is the RAN, software management. We integrate that with different core partners where it makes sense. And so these deployments we're doing today have a really wide range of kind of how we're doing the deployments. I'll talk through a couple of those today. We've had some recent successes in broadcast events. So we're actually doing some work with AT&T and our core partner there being Pente. We put together a really straightforward, simple broadcast system that's been used across a number of events. And the number one thing that customers get excited about is the turn up for these systems is as long as it takes the radio to boot.
Yeah.
Right. So a couple of minutes, you can have the system up and running, and you can have the system going. So that's actually been deployed. I think we can name that. We supported the Kentucky Derby and some things last year, and a few NASCAR events that were used for some connectivity. Another one that's really exciting, which we did talk about at IWCE with our core partner Ataya in this case, where we put part of the core on the radio. And so in that case, you only need the radio from a deployment perspective. We did a deployment at this private school called Thatcher School out in Southern California to cover a big 200-acre campus. And in that case, they were trying to use Wi-Fi, but the campus is too large. They couldn't connect everywhere they wanted. And, the use cases we're powering there are things from, video surveillance to, just general tablets or staff connectivity across the campus. Mm-hmm. I'll mention one other one as well, which we did out in Houston. They had this kind of big park. It's kind of a water reclamation facility, but also a public park. And so they had a lot of dead areas where they didn't have any security. So, public park, they're dark areas. So what we did was we put up a couple of radios on an existing water tower. We provided full coverage over that campus, and they were able to connect 5G cameras to provide, real-time surveillance and kind of CCTV system for that particular deployment.
Yep. You're touching on something that we have seen time and time again on the Keen side, which is you start with what I call low-hanging fruit use cases. 5G cameras are a great example. Tablets and similar devices, great example. But I think you've seen, and we're certainly seeing on the Keen side of the opportunities we pursued, is that those initial use cases then lead into more complicated and business important use cases. For instance, at Washington United Terminals, we've deployed private network there as well, and now we're connecting their ship-to-shore cranes. And there's some other things that we're doing that isolates those devices, those critical infrastructures away from the internet, and purely just uses the private 5G network as a backhaul source. And so those are, I guess the point I'm trying to make, Stephen, is as enterprises start to really experiment and become more familiar with connectivity through private 5G, the initial use cases become door openers for other bigger use cases. And before they know it, the network is as critical a function in their IT stack as everything else that they're running. It's pretty important for them to have that level of connectivity.
Yeah, 100%. And we find that if most of these companies we're talking to today, and you might see this too, we're talking about basic connectivity problems that we're solving. Hey, I can't connect my scanner here, I can't connect my tablet, or I need video here, and I don't want to run an expensive fiber. So that is the entry point. As we talk about adoption of physical AI or robotics, these things are coming. I think we see that evolution a little bit slower from our perspective. But clearly that will drive adoption as private 5G comes along. But the good thing is, if we can start with the customer saying, hey, I'll solve your one or two problems that you have right now that we can define, we create this fabric now that they can come and solve new problems. And I think we'll see that at Port of Tacoma too, right? They're going to start small, start a couple, and then it's going to blow up from there.
There are already a couple, and I'm not in a position to be able to share what those are, but I can say they're pretty exciting and only possible because now they have, as you rightly pointed out, a fabric of connectivity that spans areas that they were not able to cover in the past. And so now they have this whole new world of really cool things that they can go solve for because they have that connectivity. This wasn't on any of our scripts, but I think it's probably an opportune time to at least mention it, which is there's purely private 5G networks where the customer owns, operates, their networks. And then there's this concept of neutral host. And neutral host has gotten some air cover for clients who need the ability to not only manage and broadcast their own private PLMs, Neutral Host offers the ability to also broadcast at carriers PLM as well. And I guess my question there is, Neutral Host is actually helping even change the game when it relates to traditional DAS or distributed antenna systems as well. What are you seeing in terms of interest in Neutral Host?
Sure. Yeah, it's a topic I've been working on the past couple of years. And
Yeah.
the good thing is, I think neutral host is easily understood from a customer perspective. If you walk in and say, to university or to business and say, hey, I can make sure all of your customers or students or employees have access to their existing cellular provider, that's an easy, understandable kind of use case. And like you rightly said, the DAS dynamics have changed dramatically, right? The carriers, kind of how they bring that to market, and how now it's more of an enterprise-funded venture, whereas previously the carriers are bringing in. Traditionally, these DAS systems can take quite a long time to deploy, and so as we have brought these small cell-based CBRS systems to market, we're seeing that, okay, on this existing network or on this new 4G or 5G small cell-based network, I can do two things. I can provide carrier-based services on it, but I can also run a private 5G system.
Yep.
So today you can do neutral host on CBRS with 4G. We're pushing very heavily on the carriers to adopt a similar model on 5G.
Yep.
And with our latest products, radios, we have some really strong advantages there that we're pushing on. But I think what we're going to see is that the carriers still kind of own that pathway on what is allowed for use in that space. So I think it honestly opens up a bit of innovative type optionality on how can I inject private 5G into, maybe we'll say off-air DAS or something like that maybe is a little more accessible. But all of that kind of using CBRS as the private 5G kind of spectrum to use. But neutral host is very dynamic, I would say. And for us, it's really getting the carriers to align on what's that strategy to support 5G inside enterprises. Yeah.
Just when you thought you knew 5G, and then stuff like neutral host comes along, which has always been there, but now, to your point, is the chatter is increasing, certainly for building owners who want to be are regulated to, or by law, they have to provide some cellular coverage indoors or outdoors, depending on their location. Neutral host becomes a great alternative to DAS, and we won't get into the mix of why neutral host is better than DAS, because that'll be a whole other session.
Yeah, another session on that one for sure.
Yeah, a whole other one. So where do we go from here? What's ahead for Moso? What can you share with us in terms of both the market and how you continue evolving and launching new features on Moso's products to get ahead of where the market is going?
Yeah, at Moso, there's a couple of key tenets, and we're really focused on simplicity, number one, making it accessible, right, for businesses and enterprises of any size. So that's number one. So anything I can do in our software to make it more plug and play, to make it more integrated into partner systems like Keen, we're heavily focused on that. There is a lot of interest from me on bringing AI into the platform. I know that probably just kind of word.
But it's not. You're doing it not in the Me Too moment. It is really truly, from what I've seen and heard in our conversations, AI is becoming a truly integral part to the value of Moso.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we look at how can I automate things, how can I do dynamic system restoration or help our customers troubleshoot problems that may be a bit more complex based on their needs. That's what I'm looking to do and build in, but do it in the right way, at the right kind of accessibility, and solving the right problems for the system. So we're looking at that. I'm also looking at bringing in particular features around quality of service. As you look at neutral host, for example, if I'm running multiple kind of connections over my shared infrastructure, I need to be able to manage how packets and data is traveling and prioritized through that shared asset. So that's something we're really looking at, everything from slicing to kind of Linux-based quality of service to some other things we can do to prioritize traffic.
You bet. Awesome. Well, it's an exciting time for Cellular. It's an exciting time for enterprises with Cellular. It's certainly been an exciting time for our collaboration with Keen and Moso. And from that standpoint, Stephen, we can't be more thrilled to be a partner of yours and part of your ecosystem as together we're going after some really hefty accounts and spreading the joy of Cellular and the freedom of Cellular to enterprises as well. So this is probably a good moment to wrap up today's conversation with Stephen from Moso. If there's one key takeaway that I'd ask you all to consider, it's this: the future of enterprise connectivity won't be a one-size-fits-all, but winners who bring these connectivity solutions to the market that are easy to deploy and frankly much more affordable that's on the truck today and can scale are the ones who are going to clearly win. Stephen, thank you for sharing your insights with us and the work that you're doing at Moso to make private wireless more accessible for the enterprise. To our listeners, if you're thinking about upgrading your network for the next generation of applications, Moso and Keen is definitely a company to watch. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, tell us what you liked about today's session, ask us questions. We'd love to hear from you. And please be open to sharing this episode with your teams and your colleagues. Until next time, keep innovating and let's stay unplugged. Thanks again, Stephen.
Thanks a lot, Jim.